This is AUGforums.com Real Talk. First, thank you to our sponsors, APS Payments, DataSelf, and Velixo. Please take a minute to support this podcast by clicking each one of the sponsor banners located at AUGforums.com/sponsors. Every click helps to support this podcast. My name is Tim Rodman, and I'm coming to you live on Thursday, May 20th, 2021. This is episode number 44, Dan Miller, Fractional CFO, Connecting EBITDA to Acumatica. And before Dan introduces himself, just wanted to point out that it has been about 2 months since our last episode. Doing the live broadcast and getting that going has occupied whatever brain space I have for these kind of things. But I think we'll be back into the every 2-week cadence here with the podcast. So I'm happy to restart here with Dan. And I am calling in from the side of the road in San Diego, California. You might hear some cars driving by. I'll try to stay muted. But Dan, thanks for coming on today, and I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for having me. So I'm not sure how far back to go. Did my undergraduate work in Southern California at Pomona College and got my MBA at the University of Denver. Born and raised in Colorado, in the Denver area, where I am still today. Have had a kind of a varied career. Started in sales and then moved into marketing, and then got volunteered to move over into finance and operations many years ago, and have stayed there since. Mostly C-level positions, CFO, COO, and positions, CFO, COO, and CEO for a number of different organizations. I've had my own companies as well as worked for others, gotten a paycheck. And about 4 years ago, left my last corporate job and started a fractional CFO practice. So there are a lot of fractional CFOs, especially in Denver, where we have a lot of small to medium-sized businesses that need the expertise of a CFO, but maybe don't have enough resource or enough to fill a full-time CFO position. And so I do the CFO thing. I'm a full-time CFO. I just do it on a part-time basis for a number of different organizations. In my space, there are 3 kind of different types of CFO positions. So there's an interim CFO where somebody would come in on a full-time basis for maybe 6 months or a year, usually around CFO expertise, just like they might have an outsourced accountant or an outsourced attorney. But they're not really getting the same kind of expertise. They're getting more advice, I think. A fractional CFO is actually a member of the organization. So I'm on the leadership team at all of my clients as their CFO. And some of them I work half a day a week, and some of them I work multi-days a week. And it just depends on the needs of the organization. And so I've been having a great time doing this for a variety of businesses and industries. I work mostly in manufacturing and distribution and in financial services, where I've had a career where I can add sort of a more value, an immediate value and an impact. Not that I couldn't be a CFO in an IT SaaS company or a healthcare company, but on a fractional basis where I'm working maybe more value, an immediate value and an impact. Not that I couldn't be a CFO in an IT SaaS company or a healthcare company, but on a fractional basis where I'm working maybe a half a day a week or a day a week, that becomes a pretty steep learning curve, and I can't add immediate value there. So I would just refer that out to another fractional CFO here who lives in that space and try to stay in my lane. The other difference is that there are a lot of fractional CFO firms that descend on a company with a CFO and a VP of finance and a controller and accounting manager and some bookkeepers, and they take over the entire finance function. And I don't. It's just me. I work with my clients, and I'd rather grow and mentor and train their people. And I know that as time goes on, the time I'm in an organization will go up and go down as we get some things streamlined and work on, new and better KPIs and that sort of thing. And that's pretty much fully booked, and I have to turned some opportunities away. So that's unfortunate, but I'm glad that it's working out the way it is, and I'm having a great time.
That's really cool. Backing up to your undergrad days at Pomona there, what was your undergrad? And I'm curious how you, even if you had any thought about finance at the time.
Farthest thing from my mind. Great question. I started as a chemistry government double major, and I was going to then go to law school and write my PhD in forensic criminology. It was a passion of mine, and found out that college level chemistry and I didn't get along very well. And so I dropped to just a government major and was just going to go to law school. A lot of attorneys in my family. My father was an attorney. My brother and sister are both attorneys. But after 4 years of college, I didn't want to start first year law school because it's so tough. So I took a year off and worked in business. I was a photographer. It was a hobby of mine, and had a small little photography business that I did on my own. I went to work at a camera store and worked there in sales and then marketing. And the CEO came over to me one day and said, our controller is leaving and you should take that job. And I said, what? That's accounting. Are you kidding? He said, you're working on your MBA. I said, yeah, but not to do accounting. But I went ahead and did that. And I've been in finance and operations now for about 35 years.
That's really cool. I always like hearing that kind of pivot point because, I don't know, I find people that do well at consulting have that very varied, diversified background. And many times it's not what they thought they would be doing. And maybe that's the reason they're good at doing it.
Well, I do definitely have the varied background in different career paths and for different types of organizations. In the old days, our parents and grandparents would work at one company for 30, 40 years and retire and maybe get a watch. Then the next generation came and people stayed in one role and move around from different company to company. Now I think, the new generation of workers now, every 3 to 5 years, they change from one role to another. So I'm kind of in between that. I've stayed I've done a lot of different roles, but I have stayed in senior level finance for an awfully long time. And this is the final chapter. I'm having a great time, and I'll do this. One of the things that's interesting about the fractional work is that I can cut back pretty easily. As one client transitions off, I choose not to transition another one on. And so as I start to get older and have grandkids, maybe I'll go to 6 days a week and then only 5 days a week and then maybe 3 days a week and do some traveling, that sort of thing. And I joke when I say only work 6 days a week, but I'm looking forward to only working 6 days a week.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm actually curious there on the fractional side, if you have any tricks where I just started off on my own last fall, and it's always a learning to not have too much work, but not run out of work either. And when you say fractional, a fraction is normally a percent of a whole, but I'm sure your percentage goes over 100%.
My percentage goes over 100% many times. It sure does. The trick is to just
for managing that.
Keep doing it. I mean, I'm up early every morning working, and I work late every night, and I work all day long, and occasionally take some breaks, but manage to fit it all in. Right now, the economy the last couple of years has been a little bit uncertain. I think we're on a pretty good path right now as things start to reopen. But work while the sun shines, and so when I've had other opportunities to take them, I suck them up and try to figure out how to do that. So it's just it's work-life balance, and have to make sure that you're always balancing family time and hobbies and health and not work too much.
It sounds like it definitely keeps things interesting for you, and you've been going at it for a while. It sounds like you like what you do. Before we get to the EBITDA part of it, maybe talk to us a little bit about what got you connected with Acumatica. Being a fractional role, I'm sure that's not a full-time thing for you. How did Acumatica come across your personal radar?
It's interesting. So my last full-time job, I was with a distribution company. We were about 150 million in sales with all of our divisions. And we had our own proprietary ERP that we had been developing. It's really a spectacular product. We had a team of developers on staff, and we were making this great ERP program, but it did not include the accounting piece. And as much as I tried to lobby for that, that wasn't going to happen. And so we, at the time, were integrating with one of the Mass products. I think it was Mass 200. And I had used Mass at several iterations, other companies I'd been at before, so that was an easy switch. And there were just so many things it couldn't do for us. And so we started looking to try to figure out what else we could use, a different accounting package. And we looked at a bunch of different ones, some very high-level ones, a NetSuite or an Oracle, and some really little ones. And it kind of came to an Oracle and some really little ones. And it kind of came down to two packages that I had not used before. One was Intact, and one was Acumatica. And the VAR in that space couldn't seem to get Acumatica to open and run. And so our demos were really challenging. And Intact looked pretty good. And so we actually went with Intact, and I became an Intact product expert as we migrated to that. So that was my first touch with Acumatica. And then as many years later now, it's been about three and a half years ago, started with an organization here in Denver as their fractional CFO. And one of the big kind of roadblocks that we had is that we were on QuickBooks and it wasn't doing what we needed. And there's so many problems that people can change things very easily in QuickBooks. So if they make a mistake, they can just go in and change it. I hate that people can change things so easily. If they make a mistake, they just go in and change it. And
same thing.
And have had a bunch of clients, past and current, on QuickBooks. And so it's been that love-hate relationship. But this client of mine was moving from QuickBooks to Acumatica. They're part of a group of companies, and the group had made the decision to move to Acumatica. And so although I'd seen it a little bit and run it a little bit, I'd never really run it. And so this was a first jump in. And it was a few versions ago. And like with all of the other accounting packages that I'd used before, Mass and QuickBooks and Intact, over time, as new release, fix all the problems and add the new features. And so the things that I didn't like at the beginning, then either I figure out a workaround, or I figure out how I'm supposed to be doing it, and it's a me around, or it's improved in a future release. And so I've come to really enjoy working with Acumatica. I mean, there's still some things that are a little funky or a little hard or a little challenging, but I've been really impressed with Acumatica as an accounting package in terms of the workflow and the functionality and the things that we're getting it to do for us.
I like that background. I actually came from a Mass 500 background, another Sage product, actually built by the same company, Acuity, I think it was, that built Mass 200 and also Mass 90, which a lot of the old Mass 90 partners are now in Acumatica. And similar background coming from that for that particular company. And
there were some things I really liked about
company. And
there were some things I really liked about Mass, but I was really glad when we moved at that last company I was at, when we moved from Mass to Intact, because Intact was small and nimble and aggressive and really going after the market. And then a couple of years later, Sage bought Intact, and so Sage, who owns Mass, bought Intact, and so they're back together again. And so I'm glad that I'm on Acumatica and not on one of those platforms.
Well, it sounds like that worked for you because it was only doing the accounting function. You had your own piece doing the rest of it, right?
Right.
And where I've heard Intact's struggle is when you get out of the accounting department. I mean, they're really good at talking to controllers and CFOs, but not so good when you get out into operations. And I'm curious if that's been your experience as you compare the two products in your head.
Well, I think a lot of it is the modules that you have installed. I think a lot of it is the modules that you have installed and the way that you're using it, and also the strength of the people who are using the different modules. So from an accounting perspective and an operational perspective, but because I use Acumatica every day now, it's not hard for me to make it do the things I need it to do. And so I appreciate the way the program was developed and the workflow through it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I like how it's structured. Yeah.
How about reporting? I don't have much in-tax experience. One thing I've heard is they have a really nice financial report writer that allows you to slice and dice by a lot of different things, that dimensional reporting. Have you compared much in your head between that and Acumatica's financial report writer?
I have not been very successful with the Acumatica financial report writer. I've tried doing a few reports on my own, and I haven't gotten the hang of it yet. Coming from a crystal reporting background from the Sage products, from Math, Intact was very similar to that. I've done some of the reporting in Acumatica with the RPX reports to modify some of the pre-written reports. Usually what I'm trying to do, which I think is probably the wrong approach, but what I'm trying to do is get the data out of Acumatica and get it into some sort of an Excel format, because I can make Excel do just about anything except maybe brush your teeth. And so once I can get it into kind of that flat file format, I can do what I want with the data. I'd rather to be able to run all the data and do all the look, and that's, I'm sure, probably the wrong approach, but it's something that I can do and get functional for the data I need. Because to me, it's really all about, it's about processing the work and getting through the workflow, but it's really about managing the data and making the company better, figuring out how to achieve what we want to, figuring out what we want to achieve, and then being able to achieve that, both from a strategic and a tactical perspective, to get the data out to be able to do that. I think that's really where I go after it.
That's interesting you say that, because I find myself doing the same thing. All Excel, nothing's more flexible or powerful. That's a rare combination than Excel is, right? And I find myself doing the same thing, even if I know the end result is going to be an Acumatica dashboard or a report in Acumatica. I just find the back and forth process of working with the data, and getting the report looking the way you want is so much faster to do in Excel. That's interesting that you find the same thing.
Yeah, and it's probably not the way we should be doing things, Tim, but boy, I can make it happen, and I can get it into something that I'm comfortable with, and just give me the data. Well, what data do you want? I'll take it all. So the client that I'm on with Acumatica, it's called CCS Presentations. We're an audio video integrator, and we use a quoting design tool package called D-Tools, pretty popular in the industry. And just export everything and let me get it into Excel, and I'll pick and choose the columns that I need and the data that I need, and not have it do the filtering and the sorting inside the program. And so getting it into Excel, then I can, I've got so many multi-tab worksheets, but I do what I call drop-ins. Give me all the raw data, I'll drop it in, and then on another tab, I'll drop it in, and then on another tab, I'll go choose. Sometimes the columns are in different order, and so maybe I have to do an analysis to figure out which column it's in first by the header title or something like that. But then just let me have my way with it, and I can do what I need for reporting purposes. But you're right, keeping it all inside, and to that end, sometimes I'll do 10 or 20 or 30 iterations in Excel because it's so easy to make those changes. Then when I figure out what I want, I got a final product, maybe then I'll take it back into Acumatica and do a generic inquiry or do some sort of a custom report to be able to get that data to, now that I know what we need and what's going to help us determine whatever it is, any sort of metric, to be able to have that and have that appear on dashboards. I think the dashboards is a huge feature of Acumatica because I'm working with a lot of people who I'd say generally are not sophisticated users. Maybe they could use an Excel workbook that I've prepared for them, but they're not going to get in there and manage the data. I need to be able to slap them in the face with it in a nice way and say, okay, this is green. Here's your dashboard. This is green because it's good. It's above the metric we've established. This one's yellow, needs some work. This one's red, needs immediate attention today. And so by doing that, not in Excel, but by doing it in Acumatica, I think we get a better result.
I love doing these podcast episodes unscripted because we weren't planning to talk about Excel. Well, we didn't have much plan at all, and I never do. I just like, and I love when something like this comes up because it's almost like it was scripted because I find myself doing exactly the same thing. That's all I'm doing these days is reporting tools in Acumatica. And so to hear, you almost write the script, we could have completely been in line ahead of it to come up spontaneously like that. I think it's amazing. I find myself doing exactly the same thing. Even when you, like you said, you put it back into Acumatica, and I agree with you on the dashboards. A great tool to have there. But getting to the finish line and knowing what you want it to look like, a lot of times it's a lot easier to do in Excel. And then you cast it. I like saying Excel is like working with clay. It's easy to change your mind, and reporting such a back and forth process. It's very malleable. And then once you get it the way you want, then you cast it in concrete by putting it in the Acumatica reporting tools. And it works well.
It does. And that's a great way to do it. And, if I were as comfortable with generic inquiries or the financial report writer or some of the other programs like Lixo, something like that, I'm sure that I would be doing it that way. But I have to kind of revert back to something that I'm comfortable with, that I know I can control and that I can manage. Whether it's, comparing by sales order or by customer number or whatever, and all often, every day probably, I'm involved in something that is taking 2 or 3 different downloads of information from Acumatica to try to get to the end result of whatever I'm trying to get to, and do it in Excel.
Because I am familiar with those other tools. I work with them a lot, and I still find myself pulling Excel out of my tool belt, or especially in the beginning, And so maybe it's just a better tool. Maybe it's not just us. Maybe
that's right. Maybe it is a better tool. Certainly more universal. Everybody has Excel, right? Because everybody's got 365, and so everybody has it, whether they like it or not, pretty much.
There you go. So what about this EBITDA stuff? We put EBITDA in the title, maybe for those listening who are Acumatica folks, but not accountants. Maybe you could give us a description of what EBITDA is. It's EBITDA. What is EBITDA are earnings before income taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So how's the company doing? How did we do this week, this month, this quarter, this year? And a lot of I work with a lot of small to medium-sized businesses, and many of them are essentially on a cash basis. And how they're doing is how much money's in the checkbook that week, and that's great. But that doesn't really tell us how the company's doing. And so to manage to something else, okay, let's take a P&L or an income statement, a profit and loss statement, and let's look at the structure of the business and are we making money? So I have a couple of accurate. So today we're mid-May. We should already have looked at April financials a week ago. By the 15th of the month, we should have the month closed, and we should have everything that happened in April in the financials. Well, what about this? Nope, we got to figure it out. Well, I don't get that until the end of the next month. Well, we got to find a better way to track that data and get that data and get it in to the month. And the second thing that's really important to me is that it's got to be fair. It's not fair for May to have a $10,000 expense that was incurred in April. We need to look at May with May's revenue and May's expenses by itself and determine if, May, and if we put that $10,000 expense in May,
for the year-to-date number, how are we doing so far for the year? It's not going to have a difference, but for the monthly number, it is. And so to me, timeliness doing so far for the year, it's not going to have a difference, but for the monthly number, it is. And so to me, timeliness and accuracy in the financials, and also keeping sure that all of the entries are fair. So then let's assume that we've got all that in. Maybe that's a big assumption. I hate to make too many assumptions, but let's assume that we've got all the data into the financials. Then we want to analyze and determine, how did the month do based on that? How was our earnings? What was our revenue? What were the costs against that revenue? What were the SG&A, the sales, general, and administrative costs that we have? What costs should be above the line before we have a gross profit number, and what costs should be below the line? But then we're going to have depreciation. Depreciation is super important. It's spreading out the costs of fixed assets that we've already purchased, or assets that we're investing in, and we're going to depreciate them. I think that depreciation should be done on a monthly basis because it's part of that financial number, but it's maybe not part of the number of how we get an earnings for that month. And so it might take out interest. We have to borrow money for whatever reason, maybe to cover the peaks and the valleys in the cash flow, or because of investments that we're making in infrastructure, or buying new computers, or investing in software. So the interest is not May's fault. It doesn't belong in May. We need to have it in May, but let's see what the earnings were before that. If we make a income tax accrual, or we set some money aside for taxes, let's set that aside also as we evaluate. Maybe we purchase some assets and we're amortizing them. So let's not include that in the monthly as well. So all comes down to what I think, number that we can use to compare over time. Not that net income at the end of the day isn't important, but there's some other elements in there that don't give us a good perspective of how the company does. So we look at EBITDA and we determine how the company is doing. Now, for companies that have bank loans, EBITDA is often tied to a covenant or something that banks look at. Okay, are you making money before depreciation and before interest? How's the company doing? So EBITDA is a pretty important thing.
Your timely and accurate thing sounds like you're the parent of 12 children whose names are January through December, and you're trying your best to meet their needs as timely as possible, but also treat them all fairly.
Yeah, I've never thought about it that way, but I have a bunch of kids, and so maybe tonight when I go home, I'll tell them about that. And here's what Tim thinks kids are. Yeah, timely and accurate and fair, and now clean up your room.
That's right. Now we need a return on the investment.
That's right. And go back to the accounting team members that we've got in my different organizations and say, okay, it's time to clean your room before you can watch TV tonight. Same as getting all your general ledger entries posted.
So I don't know if we'll ever be able to turn a dollar profit on kids. We get our profit non-monetarily, right? But
that's right. They're intangible benefits.
In a business, you got to turn a profit, and I'm curious your thoughts on the EBITDA. I'm going to call EBITDA profit for lack of a better term. You put revenue in, you take expenses out. If you do it before the tax and depreciation, that's maybe a better number to use. But bottom line, you got to have a black number, not a red number, a positive earnings to exist as a company. And maybe what are some of your thoughts on how you use an ERP system with your varied background in different ERP systems, how you use an ERP system like Acumatica to increase EBITDA or profit or whatever you want to call it? How do you have an impact on that bottom line and not just be an expense, to maintain the software?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that it's really important to be able to analyze the data that you've got and to look for what I would call profit leaks. Where are we spending money and why are we doing that? Oh, well, that's $500 a month and we spend it every month. How come? Because we've always done that. No, but do we still need it? And why are we spending money on that? And to look, it's important to be able to have a high level view and to see how we're doing, but it's also important to be able to drill into each of those areas and to be able to subdivide them and group them, and then also to take that group and split it back out. Whether it's done in Acumatica reporting or export it to Excel and take a look at it to summarize some of them. I think it's important. I think it's important for people to, in a lot of the organizations I work in, we might not share financial information with employees, but I think it's important for them to understand what they do and how they do it and how it fits into the greater whole and what their role is and what the impact is.
So not just having accounting be a mysterious function.
Absolutely.
It to the whole organization, not just the finance department.
It's a mysterious function, Tim, because we do that. I don't consider myself an accountant, although I do accounting every single day. I think it's important for everyone to understand how it all fits together.
And maybe to help those who are listening who aren't accountants, I don't know if you have one of these, but if you have, you mentioned those expenses that you might be incurring that maybe you're not even aware that you're incurring, or it's one of those things that we've always done it and never really questioned it. I'm sure that a lot of people in organizations have seen that, and they just don't know how to communicate it in the right language to get the attention of accounting. And I'm curious if maybe you have a story or two, an anonymous story or two from your clients that you've seen, like how it bubbled up and how it got addressed and how it even happened in the first place. One of these like unnecessary expenses. Yeah, any come to mind there?
There have been so many, but I had a client that had a subscription service to, I don't even know that we knew what it was for. I don't know if it was for a magazine or email or some sort of online service, but they were getting information. And over time, I think they were getting lead generation is what it was. And I don't know how it was distributed to them. And I'm sure it changed over the years. It probably first came out in, a weekly newsletter that was mailed to them. Here are some leads for you. But then it all obviously moved online over time. But nobody looked at it. Oh, I think Fred might have used to look at that. No, maybe it was John. Oh, they both retired. Okay, so is anybody looking at this information? No. Then why are we spending this $1,000 a month? Because we always have. It's just built into the tab. It's just built into the data. So yes, we can look at that, but without going through the financials and knowing, well, who knew about this? Well, accounting pays it every month, so clearly they knew it. Well, yeah, it's been approved, or it was on someone's credit card, or it's just an automatic payment, or it comes out of the bank account, or whatever. Well, then we got to do one of two things. We've got to either start using that, maybe that could really give us a boost up and help us in our organization, or let's cancel it. Well, I don't think we can cancel it. We have to wait till the end of the year. Okay, let's cancel it at the end of the year. And there are so many legacy things like that are built into organizations that people just lose sight of. And not that we have to drill into every nickel and dime in the organization, but boy, it's so important to look at that. And it's probably a very valid expense. I mean, at one point it was a valid expense. Maybe now where you want and find it on your search in your browser. But we lose sight of so many of those things in every organization. And, some of these expenses are so small, they're not even worth dealing with. Certainly, we should look at the bigger ones first. We should look at the ones that are going to make a bigger difference first. Sometimes those are too hard to get our head around. And so maybe all the smaller ones combined are as important as one of the bigger ones. So I think that it's really important to do that in any organization.
I'm glad you brought up subscriptions. What a great example. I mean, there's a reason why SaaS software specifically is so popular. SaaS software like Acumatica, that business model just makes investors salivate because they've got you on the hook. And I wonder how many software products just get continued to be paid for even when they're not being used. Well, it just makes investors salivate because they've got you on the hook. And I wonder how many software products just get continued to be paid for even when they're not being used for reasons that you just described right there.
And, they got a license, and so then they just keep using it. But also, we get tied into using that software. I mean, don't take my Acumatica away. Don't take my Excel away. All the other things that I have, whether it's a monthly subscription to Zoom or a monthly subscription to Adobe, don't try and take any of those away from me because I use them all. But I'm sure there's probably some that I've signed up for, and I'm going to look at it again and make sure I'm still using them and still need it because, let's try it for a month, and then it's an automatic. And, it's like my streaming services, all 47 of them that we pay for at home. And, beyond, I don't think even when I die, it cancels the Netflix subscription.
I hadn't considered that. That's a good point, though. As long as the credit
better make a list of them. That's right. Put it in with my will. Here's a list of all my streaming services so that you can make sure you cancel them.
So it sounds like your connection between how you make Acumatica improve your bottom line is simply getting things to be visible. And the fact that you can, a lot of it, I think, then comes down to reporting, where you've got to do the work to create the reports that bubble up that information to the top so you can spot it and then take action on it, right?
That's a great summary. One of the things, so we do audio video integrations. We do projectors and interactive displays and audio video systems in rooms and conference rooms, video systems in rooms and conference rooms. We do a lot of schools and boardrooms and that type of thing. And don't ask me for the technical information because fortunately I'm not on that side of the business. But from an accounting perspective, it's important to be able to determine how we did on a profitability on a per project basis. And so we use the projects module in Acumatica, and we tie everything back to that project. And then I run reports to see what the profitability was of the project. And so we look at the profitability not only of the product, but also the labor and the shipping and this charge and that charge. And we tie everything back to that project. And then I pull the data out of Acumatica to look at the profitability of every single project. And, we used to do a little bit of job costing. There's a little bit we could do with QuickBooks, but there's a lot more I could be doing with it. But we tie all the labor dollars and subcontract labor and any additional associated costs that we might, if we have to rent a big truck to deliver things, or we have to rent a lift that's taller than the ones that we normally use, or anything like that, any associated costs all get tied back to that project. And we can run those project reports and look at profitability. And we do that on a regular basis.
I'm glad you brought up projects. I'm curious your experience. When I see projects in an organization, in my opinion, it's a real struggle when the only people who care about the profitability of projects are the ones in finance. And it can be very difficult to get project managers to care, and maybe you have to incentivize them financially or whatever to get the project managers managing not just the deadlines, the time element of difficult to get project managers to care, and maybe you have to incentivize them financially or whatever to get the project managers managing not just the deadlines, the time element of the project, but the profitability as well. I'm curious.
Absolutely.
Your thoughts there.
It's a great point.
It over to the project managers.
It's a great point, and it's important to, I hate to say that we have to incentivize everything, but certainly tying comp does bring results. If for no other reason than it lets people know what we think is important. So our project managers are not incentivized based on projects, but it's something we've thought about and something we may get to, because if they could do a better job, or if they could plan it a little better, or they could save money by, renting a lift and using it for 2 jobs in a row instead of sending it back for each one. If we can plan the shipping better, our project profitability instead of the product profitability and the anticipated profitability of the job, but actually tying budget back to actual, which in a lot of organizations I work in, we put together budgets for all of our income and expense categories, and we look on a monthly or quarterly basis and say, how did we do, and why did we miss the mark, and what do we need to do to bump that one up or lower that other one? And so that's true both on a financial basis or a project basis. But you're right. In all of these analyses, if it doesn't go beyond finance, it has limited value. Even if the CFO knows the numbers and can work with them, if we don't bring it back to the rest of the organization and say, hey, every time we do this, we lose money, let's not do that again, the organization has to figure that out.
Yeah, to me, that's a key component of what an ERP system is supposed to bring to the table. It's not supposed to be an accounting system. It's supposed to be a system that connects the departments in your organization and at least reduces the information silos, right? And maybe that's what Acumatica is supposed to bring to the table, and how it is supposed to impact your bottom line, and that it's supposed to get departments more on the same page, working together and caring about the profitability and not just their little silo of expertise, right?
Right. We are so siloed in every organization, and we don't want to share information, partly because some people, maybe it's job security. Some people, well, they shouldn't really have that information. And there are certain things we don't want to share, detailed payroll information, although in almost every organization I've been in, everybody knows what everybody's making, no matter how hard I work to try to keep that all confidential. They all seem to know how hard I work to try to keep that all confidential. They all seem to know. Or maybe they all have my passwords, I don't know. But there are some things we shouldn't share, but there's so many things that we should share, because we can't get better if we don't. If we just leave everybody siloed in their own division and working on their own things, without that share of information, then it's much harder. Not that we can't improve, not that we can't get better, but it's much harder.
Yeah, it seems to me like just society in general here in 2021, you look at Edward, I can never remember if it's Edward or Eric or Snowden is the last name I remember, Snowden,
yeah.
WikiLeaks, etc. It's almost like there are no secrets anymore with social media, etc. And what makes us think in organizations that we can continue with the silos when just society in general has blown the door off of secrecy, it seems like.
But also there's a time to share, and there's certain data that can be helpful to share. And also people like to know, how's the company doing? I heard we're really struggling because of the pandemic, or we lost that one order, or we lost that one manufacturer, or whatever it might be in any organization. We used to, we had the Smith Brothers account and we lost that, whatever it is. And I think people need to know. I also think that maybe this is related a little bit to the pandemic and not, that people like security. People like to know things are okay. And if things are not okay, maybe they're going to move. I read an article recently about how there's going to be a real turnover tsunami, it said, in people leaving their organizations to find another job now that the pandemic is starting to end and they're feeling a little more secure. And maybe if they were a little more secure, and maybe if they were a little more secure in the company that they worked for and know that things are okay because some of that financial information was shared, that they would stay longer. And that's always in the company's best interest. Now, if the company's really struggling, I think maybe that's okay to tell the employees that too, because then they'll know why we want them to work that extra hour or save that extra nickel or do whatever, because we're like a family here and we want to pull out of it. So I think there's always a reason for sharing certain information. And having that information available, I'll bring it back to Acumatica and its dashboards, trying to figure out what the right information is for each employee or each employee group, to be able to see on their dashboards. As soon as any one of our employees logs into Acumatica, boy, just right in front of their face are all the key performance indicators, the KPIs that we're measuring them on. And it's such a great way to keep it tied back to daily activities, to daily living, to daily life.
That's a great point about the employee turnover, and if it is bad, how bad is it? I totally agree with that. If the organization is not doing well, people know it anyways. But if they don't know more details about it, then their imaginations just run wild and it turns into the boogeyman. If you can break it down and just be honest about how bad it is, I think you have a better chance of weathering the storm with less turnover. And coming back to EBITDA, turnover impacts your EBITDA there, right? Because there's a lot of startup costs with training new employees.
Absolutely. And it all comes back to the bottom line. I mean, all of these things are so integrated with each other, and maybe those of us in a finance role, or maybe a higher level finance role, see that and recognize that and understand how all of those are related to each other. And we go back to people being siloed and they don't see it. And so it's important to try to figure out how to share and what to share. And I understand confidentiality. Nope, people shouldn't have that information. We don't want them to know. That's great. What can we tell them? What information can we give them to let them know how things are going, how we're doing?
Another example I just thought of is not Acumatica the product, but Acumatica the company. When I used to work at Acumatica, I was really surprised by how transparent they were with the numbers internally. And I think that had everything to do with John Roskell. And when you do that, and you just look at Acumatica's success as a company, they just went from 6,500 customers to over 10,000 customers in 1 year. I think the pandemic helped them out quite in the success of the business. And I can say from working there for a period of time that internally, quarterly, we would see some very detailed numbers. It was very transparent. And of course, Acumatica themselves is running on Acumatica, the product, internally. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with how they're able to produce those numbers, back to the timely and accurate part of it. But, there's an example of it having a positive impact on the bottom line, that transparency.
I think just to kind of tag onto that, which is part transparency, but triggered by your mentioning the pandemic, for CCS, as we moved into this pandemic and lockdown and everybody working remotely, we didn't miss a beat. Our file storage is in the cloud. Our ERP and accounting packages are all in the cloud. We made an independent decision, not because of the pandemic, but we made the decision. I made the decision. I'll own this one at the beginning of 2020 to stop mailing checks. Everything was going to be electronic payment. Either it was going to be ACH or it was going to be credit card for the smaller orders for all of our payables. And so that pandemic hit and we started working from home and it didn't matter. For a lot of organizations who were paper-based and office-based, and somebody had to be in the office to print the checks and sign the checks and fold the checks and mail the checks, it really became a struggle of how are we going to do this, and who's going to run into the office at night when no one else is there, and how do we stay 6 feet apart, and what are the city regulations on who can be driving because only essential businesses can be out, and all of that. It was because I don't want to give Acumatica all the credit, but boy, it sure made it a big difference. And with the Acumatica workflow, I could look at everybody's dashboards and I could see what they're working on and see what's done and see what's not done. And for a year, I worked from my house and just recently started to come back to offices. So a lot of kudos go out to Acumatica for making that possible.
Great example there with paper checks. Interesting point about COVID killing that too. Wonder how frequent that happened this year with companies.
Yeah. It's a big deal. And being able to make the workflow all electronic, aside from the the paper savings and the environmental savings and, having to touch things 3 and 4 times and file them and all of that. And we still do some of that, but Acumatica workflow and everything being cloud-based. Okay, we're going to work from home starting tomorrow, and I don't know when it's going to end. And it sure, we didn't miss a beat. But also, we've been on Acumatica for a few years, and if we had just gone on Acumatica, it would have been a struggle, because I remember all the meetings we had at the beginning, trying to learn how to do things, and because I worked in so many different ERPs, I knew there was a way to do it. That's the only advantage that I had is, okay, there's got to be a way to do this thing we're trying to do. Let's just figure out what it is. But then training everyone, was a lot easier when we were all in the office. So having been on Acumatica for a few years before the pandemic hit certainly led to our successes.
Very cool. Well, Dan, I know we're coming up against the top of the hour. Something I've been wanting to ask you here, maybe towards the end. Being a fractional CFO, park annual revenue number that you find companies using fractional CFOs. I know, like with implementing mid-market ERP like Acumatica, it tends to be right around that $10 million a year in annual revenue. That tends to be kind of the marker there where people kind of outgrow QuickBooks and they need a mid-market ERP. Do you find there's a similar ballpark number where companies, if they're under that, they're maybe more a candidate for a fractional CFO rather than a full-time?
I think it depends on the industry. It's a great question. In retail, manufacturing, distribution, I'd say it's probably anything north of 5 million and anything south of about 30 million, 35 million. At that point, they probably need a full-time CFO. Having worked in organizations of that size, it's pretty apparent. The smaller the organization, the CFO has to be able to wear. A lot of different hats and not just do finance. When you're in a $150 million organization, the CFO is going to have people that are responsible for all that. Maybe it reports up to the CFO. In a non-inventory situation, so retail, manufacturing, distribution all have inventory, it's going to drive the numbers up. So, for example, I have some financial services companies that I work with, and they might be in the $3 to $5 million range because they're not selling inventory. So they're selling services, and then they start to need CFO services. I think every organization needs some help from a CFO. They may not have the resources to support it. I've worked with a lot of pre-startup companies trying to help them figure out what all the processes that they might need to include and how to structure things and how they track things and how does this all drive back down and relate to EBITDA, for example. So every organization, I think, needs some senior level finance help. It just depends on how much they might need. And that would determine, how much time they need. So I think the fractional model works really well because then they can get, and I would think that because that's what I do, but then they can get the services that they need for whatever part they need. A lot of organizations, most organizations don't need an in-house general counsel, an attorney, but they might need to meet with an attorney whenever they have a contract review or 3 hours a month or 3 hours a quarter or something like that. I think they need a CFO a lot more than that because the CFO fills such a critical role in the evaluation and the growth of any organization. But I'm biased.
Do you have a phone call at the top of the hour? Or do you have another 5-10 minutes? I thought of another question.
Yeah, we can go a little bit longer.
The overlay to the annual revenue, a great response. And then, on the fractional part of it, maybe digging a little further, you had something in your email signature, I think it was called What's Your CQ? Maybe you explain that. And does that, if I understood it right, does that help a company kind of understand how a fractional CFO would fit in, or what is the CQ and how does it work?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when I started this new chapter about 4 years ago, I found that there were two things that I needed. One was people to understand what I did, and one was for me to understand some of their strengths and weaknesses. And so I put a very simple survey together. I call it the CQ, which stands for Cfo Quotient. And it looks at, there's about 30 questions, I think 34 questions. It looks at a bunch of different areas, and it allows people to rate themselves or their organization. This is a strength area for us. This is an opportunity, a growth area for us. And so then we get a numerical scale. And it's a survey that people can take on a piece of paper. Yes, I did it in Excel, and there's an online version of it that auto scores. And if they say, no, that's really not applicable to our business, if it's a financial services firm, and it asks if they're managing their inventory well, they can say, yeah, that doesn't apply to us. And then it doesn't affect the score. That's the benefit of the online version. And it's public domain. A lot of people, after I put it together, a lot of people said, oh, this is really good. You need to protect it. But I'm not going to license it or anything like that. So it just sits on my website, myfractionalcfo.com, and anybody can take it and anybody can use it. And I hope that it helps a lot of people, even if I'm not helping them, to get some clarity of, hey, you know what? We're not doing this. And, are you structuring for a sale? Are you looking for acquisitions? Are you doing any strategic planning? Do you have a monthly close process? All finance or strategic finance related questions. And then it gives you a number. And the number score kind of gives you a rating of where you are. And for me, it tells me how much time a company is going to need. If they have a really low score, they have 5, 6, 8, 10 areas where they need a lot of work, then it's going to take a lot more time than if they have 1 or 2 things that we need to work on and get corrected and get them moving down the road. So it's been a lot of fun putting that together. I think it's been revealing for a lot of organizations. Wow. Yeah, we never thought about doing that. We should be doing that. Or yeah, we talked about doing that. Okay. We talked about doing that a few years ago, and we never did. So yeah, anybody can use it. I think it's helpful for everybody. And happy to make that public domain that people can use.
That's cool. I'll drop a link to that CQ and the related links on this podcast episode page. Okay,
that'd be great. Now, I know a guy who about 6 months ago left his job and started a consulting practice, doing a lot of Acumatica reporting and that type of thing. And if you haven't taken the CQ yet, you should, because it's applicable for every business.
I'll take a look at it. I appreciate that. Maybe I'll get to the point where I need a fractional CFO, although I doubt it. I'll take a look at it anyways. Well, that's cool. Anything else you can think of, Dan, that you wanted to mention before we wrap it up here?
It's the opportunity to have a nice chat. I have an enormous amount of respect for you and what you've done in and around Acumatica. You've been a resource and a knowledge base for so many years. Whenever I have a question on how to do something or why it works the way it does in Acumatica, I Google it, and usually there's a Tim Rodman post that will answer my question. And so that's been super valuable for us.
Well, thanks for that. And thanks for coming on today. I love learning things from other people in our industry. And I love the backgrounds too. And, just things I never knew existed, and learned some more stuff here today. And so I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share with me personally, and also with anyone listening as well.
Great. Well, thanks for having me on.
Take care.
All right.
All right. Well, now we'll catch you on the next episode of AUGforums.com Real Talk. Thanks for listening, and take care.